Hello. So the goal for today's lesson is factoring expressions. This is the last lesson we have in this unit, and basically what you're going to see is this is going to be known as the reverse distributive property, and you'll see why after we accomplish our 3 steps. So on your note page, make sure that you copy these 3 steps down. In factoring expressions, the very first step is finding the GCF, or the greatest common factor. After you have found the greatest common factor, you're going to write the factor pairs, and last, you're going to factor out the GCF. Again, these steps make more sense when we see them in action, so make sure that you have them copied down, and we're going to take them out for a spin with 3 examples today. In example 1, we have the expression 4x minus 10. The first step is to find the GCF using factor pairs. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to write my factor pairs. How do I multiply? What numbers do I multiply? What factors do I multiply to get 4? 1 times 4 and 2 times 2. So my factor pairs for 4 are 1 and 4, 2 and 2. For 10, 1 times 10, and 2 times 5. And there are no other factors I multiply together to get 10, so that's where I'm done. Now I need to find the greatest factor that they share in common. So when I look on the list, the largest number they share in common is 2. So the greatest common factor is 2. Step 2 says write out the factor pairs. So for 4, I am going to have 2 times 2, and then because I have this x attached to 4, 4 is the coefficient, I'm going to include my x here. 2 times 2x will give me 4x's. To get to 10, the greatest common factor is 2 times 5 times 5. Now I'm going to factor out the greatest common factor. So I'm going to take out the 2 because they share that in common, and I'm going to write what's left in parentheses. So the greatest common factor is 2, parentheses, 2x minus, and I'm left with 5 if I factor out that 2. Now let's see why this makes sense. If I am factoring out the expression, I can take out a 2, parentheses 2x minus 5. Now in distributive property, this means I want 2 of these and 2 of these. So 2 times 2x is 4x's, minus 2 times 5 is 10. So again, reverse distributive property. Let's take a look at another example using these steps. With example 2, I have 24y plus 18. So I'm going to use my factor pairs to start. So I have 24. And I know that I can do 1 times 24, 2 times 12, 3 times 8, 4 times 6, and then I start repeating by reversing it. 6 times 4, 8 times 3, 12 times 2. So I have all my factor pairs there. I'm going to do the same for 18. 1 times 18, 2 times 9, 3 times 6, 4 times nothing, 5 times nothing, and then I would start repeating. So if I look on my list, the greatest factor that they share in common is going to be this 6. Step 2 says, write the factor pairs. So my 24y is going to turn into 4 times 6y. My 18 is going to turn into 3 times 6. And really it should be, I messed up here, it should be 4y times 6 because I want the greatest common factor to be pulled out. So I'm correcting that. Notice how I corrected that. 4y times 6, so the greatest common factor is 6. So now I factor that out and see what I'm left with. So if I pull out the 6, put my parentheses, then I'm left with 4y plus 3. Now I can go back and check and make sure this works. If I take 6 times 4y, I get 24y. And if I take 6 times 3, I get 18. So this is factored out properly. Make sure you have all the steps to the example copied down. Let's take a look at our last example. In our last example, our expression is 65 plus 15w. So I'm going to factor out 65, and I'm going to factor out 15. I'm going to put my w there to help me remember. Well, I know 1 times 65. Now, 65 isn't a product that we have our factors memorized usually, so I'm going to go through what I know. I know 2 won't work because it's not even. 6 plus 5 is 11, so I know 3 isn't a factor. 4, I'm pretty sure isn't a factor, but I can go over here, oops, and check. 65 divided by 4 gives me, nope, 4 won't work. 5 should work because if it ends in a 5 or a 0, 5 is a factor. So 5 times what gives me 65? So I can check that out over in my scrap paper. I can get 1 5 out of there. Looks like 5 times 13. 6 won't work, 7, 8 won't work. I know 8 times 8 is 64, 9, 10. And so once I go through, I'm pretty certain that I have all my factors. So I go over here, 1 times 15, 2 times nothing gives me 15, 3 times 5 gives me 15, and my factors are done there. Part B says to factor out. So I've got 65 and 15w. Well, it looks like my greatest common factor is going to be 5. So 5 times 13, and because I've got my w here, it's going to be 5 times, and I'm left with 3w. So I'm going to pull out the greatest common factor, which is 5, put my parentheses here, and see what I'm left with. I like to write my variable first, so 3w. Up here I'm adding, so I'm going to continue with adding, and then left over here with 13. So now I check my answer to make sure this matches. 5 times 3w is 15w. 5 times 13 is 65. We're going to practice these with partners next. Make sure you have all your examples complete.